last 25 years, I've had the privilege of interviewing and highlighting some truly interesting people. Everyone who is anyone, both the famous and the infamous, from presidents and their first ladies to kings and queens, movie stars and pop stars, captains of industry, heads of state, sports personalities, innovative entrepreneurs, and some pretty fascinating everyday people. Today, I am proud to introduce you to Dr. Emily Grosholz, a philosopher, educator, and poet who uses all her background and experiences to have a meaningful impact on society. Professor Grosholz, I'm going to say Emily because I feel like I know you after reading so much about you. You're a philosopher, an educator, and a poet. What an amazing and uncommon combination and profession, I guess. Can you tell us how you became involved in that?
Well, when I went to college at the University of Chicago, what I really wanted to do was be a poet and a mathematician, like Omar Sharif. And this was like 50 years ago. And so one of the things that I discovered there, though I had a wonderful education at the University of Chicago, was that it was really hard for a woman to become a mathematician. And what I decided to do was to work on philosophy of mathematics, which allowed me to go on learning a lot of math, which I've done all the time ever since, because it's so interesting. And then it also turned me into a philosopher of science, because so much of science is organized by mathematics. All of the time from junior high school on, I had been writing poetry. So I also just went on doing that. When I was in grad school, I actually ran a poetry series right outside of Yale, and for 2 years. And I met all of these poets, including the people who ran the Hudson Review. So I started working for the Hudson Review and writing for the Hudson Review, and I've been doing that ever since too, and that's been a really important part of my life. So that's kind of how those things developed.
When I think of math, I think of it as a different language. That was not my favorite nor my best subject in school. I think that's probably why I became a lawyer. But help me to think about it in a philosopher's head. I guess I want to ask, throughout your studies, have there been any great thinkers that tend to hold particular significance for you that help shape who you are and how you think?
Yes. So apropos philosophy, one of the things that I was always interested in philosophy of math was not just how proofs are done and how logic is done, which is, of course, really important, but how math develops, because it develops in really surprising ways. And so my books about math have been about the development of math and how things that always seemed really different are brought together, and that leads to unsuspected developments. And among the most important people in that respect for me was Descartes, and in a different way, Spinoza, and also Newton.
So you've said in the past that some of your work as a philosopher has involved ethics and politics. Mm-hmm. Can you give us some examples of where those two disciplines intersect and how it relates to your philosophy?
As a philosopher of science, one of the things that I've developed in the past decade or so is philosophy of biology. And that's in part because one of my brothers, Ted Grosholz, and one of my friends from high school, Ruth Geyer Shaw, are both really important biologists studying different things. And they have become more and more politically engaged. So I noticed that and I thought, oh, this is really interesting, because one of my favorite topics to teach is Aristotle's notion of practical deliberation. How people who disagree with each other can talk to each other and decide what to do next. You can see something like that in Aristotle. But in Aristotle, it's sort of more, how do we understand the world? And whereas in Aristotle, it's what do we do next? Mm. And so, of course, with the development of climate change, I have been thinking about that a lot. And I went to both California, where my brother is, and Minnesota, where my friend from high school is. And I went to all of their field sites. And I also went to meetings with them where they were talking to politicians about what to do next. And I saw what that was when the politicians were listening to the scientists, and the scientists were listening to the politicians and working together and trying to figure out what to do. And so my next book, that is about that.
As we talked a little bit about the intersection, it made me think that there is the different approach for let's look at the problem and versus the approach of let's search for the solutions. And that's the what's next of your conversation. What's the best part about a career in academia, in your opinion?
One of the things that I discovered when I was in college was that I loved to travel. And one of the things about being in academia is that you get together with all of these people all around the world, and you can go to conferences in other countries.
I see you hold a number of judicial roles for poetry contests. We've been doing a lot of talking about philosophy. Let's talk about some poetry. How does one establish a criteria for judging such a subjective art form? I know what I like in poetry.
So one of the things that I have come to find more and more about poetry is that the form of poetry is actually really important. I have come to think that the free verse movement was, okay, there's some really good free verse, but poetry organized by rhyme and meter is the kind of poetry where you, as you're writing it yourself, you discover things because the language helps you discover things, and the strictness of the form helps you discover things. And also, poems that are written like that are much easier to turn into music. And one of the things that I've been discovering in the past decade is how important it is when people turn your poems into music, because that has happened to me here at Penn State and in Japan and in Italy, because my book Childhood, which I created with my publisher for UNICEF, which is about all my poems about my kids, has been turned into music in all three of those places.
Wow.
I went to concerts in all three of those places. And I said, this is the way in which people remember your poems when they're turned into song. So it's not that I'm a total formalist when I'm judging poems, but what I look for is I do look for rememberable form, and I do look for surprises and insights in the poems that make me think, oh, I didn't realize that, this and that, when you put them together, you see something that you wouldn't have ever seen before. So that's how I judge poems.
It's very interesting because most recently I've been reading a lot from our young poet laureate, Amanda Gorman, and
yes.
she makes me see things that I otherwise would not see.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
And the last thing that's been going on with childhood is that it's just been translated into Yoruba.
Oh, good.
And the person who is doing that in Nigeria is looking for somebody to turn it into music.
Good for you. Fantastic. That's wonderful.
I'm really looking forward to that.
That's excellent, excellent, excellent. We mentioned childhood, and I see that you've written a number of books regarding the analysis of poetry and philosophy. Tell me about some of those.
My latest book, Reflections on Poetry and the World, Walking Along the Hudson. And it is a collection of my poetry essays. And it is also my homage to the Hudson Review. So, it was really the Hudson Review that got me to start writing about the poetry of other people and analyzing the poetry of other people and making judgments about the poetry of other people. And that has, I think, been really helpful.
So as I listen to you talk, I'm just wondering, what advice would you give to aspiring poets and or philosophers, since you have your foot in both worlds?
Advice I would give to poets is find some journals that you like to work with and work with those journals, and not only send them poems, but do some work for them. That is, review things for them, because those reviews are very important for you and your poetic colleagues.
Okay.
For young philosophers, I would say, find out what you are most interested in and learn some languages, because, like ancient languages or modern languages, and make sure that you are interacting with people with the modern languages that speak those languages. Then, make sure that what you are working on is really interesting to you so that you can go for decades and decades and decades working on it.
Makes complete sense. As we come to an end, Professor Grosholz, I would like to know, what is the one thing you'd want the viewer of this video feature to walk away with?
The importance of interacting with people around the world and figuring out how to talk to people around the world in a productive way so that we can go forward.
That is a very simple piece of advice, but not one that people know how to really put into practice. I really appreciate your time today. And again, the intersection of philosophy, education, and poetry really and truly can have a meaningful impact on others around us. So thank you so much for your time today, and I certainly wish you the best.
And thank you for yours.